to give background, a little bit of what's going on. This session is organized by Interalia, which is a civil society organization established in 2013 and here in Greece, but with a very strong international in the European orientation and a very strong focus on young people. This session is taking place in the framework of educational project, which is called Building Intercultural Competences, or the acronym BIC. The title of the project speaks a lot about itself. It's coordinated by the University of Management in Bulgaria, and 6 more organizations, 7 in total from Europe, are taking place. So for almost 2 years now, we've been trying to understand how what intercultural learning skills, competencies are, and how to improve them for ourselves, but also for the young people that we get in touch. In last December, so almost a little bit more than a month ago, we had the first piloting session based on the inputs collected in the previous period, which was with the participation of all partners. And so as a follow-up step, we are launching the so-called local debates. As you will notice, probably from the names that are circulating and let's say from the names, it's by far not local. We have participants and representatives from at least 2 continents right now and from many countries. But so, as I said, it's not very local, this local debate, but I really hope that towards the end, by the end of this session, it will take the shape of a debate. My name is Boyka. I am among the founding members of Interalia, and I will facilitate this session, this meeting. We have 4 speakers today: Joanna, Stella, Emna, and Drew. I will not say anything else about them because they will have the Zoom floor very, very soon. What I want to say is how the next hour and a half will happen. So first we'll have their inputs, which I trust will be very interesting. And afterwards, we have foreseen time for questions and an actual discussion. Because I'm sure even after years in the field, I already have prepared my questions, not to keep the conversation live, but because I really have questions and I'm looking forward to their answers. So you can use the chat. You can use notes and ask them by yourself directly the questions, or you can use the raise your hand function on the Zoom. 2 important disclosures, let's say, or disclaimers, or I don't know the term, but 2 important things before we start. So we have collected your contacts through the Zoom platform in order to organize this and somehow to connect to you. They will be used for this project and will be kept in our database until the reporting period of the project ends. So if you are interested in any of the activities of Interalia, you need to be proactive and you need to find a way to get in touch in order to leave your data, to receive the newsletter or to get in touch in any other way, because we'll not be using your contacts for further communication, etc. Along with that, we are recording this session for reporting reasons above all, but as well as for further educational purposes, because I'm sure that this will be useful. These inputs and discussion will be useful, and it's good to be forwarded, to be disseminated, to be used after this meeting. I guess that was a lot of talking on my side. So just to explain how, no, let's go directly to Joanna.
Thank you, Boyka. Alex, I'm going to share my screen if that is okay, and I can. Thank you.
Joanna, just before you start or after you share the screen, say just a few words about yourself, because I decided that it rather be you, it would be better to be you rather than me.
Thank you. Okay, Boyka, can you see my screen? Can I just confirm? Great. So my name is Joanna Simos and I'm an education psychologist. I work at Arcadia University and I've been facilitating the travel of US students studying abroad in Greece for about 14 years now. So I'll be speaking from that perspective, and I have my brilliant colleague on this call as well. His name is Drew Villemay-Lightfoot. He has been the program manager for England and Wales of Arcadia University. He's actually located in the US, so he's speaking from that perspective, and we'll be talking through a couple of scenarios together. So in March of 2020, many of us located around the world were suddenly challenged with a change to every single thing that we knew. The way we communicated with people, the way we worked, the way we walked out of our house, how we touched people, what we touched, and why. It wouldn't be too crazy to say that a number of us back then, and probably a couple of times since then, have experienced culture shock. Now, culture shock, before I move on to define it and discuss a little bit about what it actually means, is one static part of a whole area of psychological and social processes, okay? So it's one static part of a number of things that happen. So today, Drew and I will actually be talking about cultural integration, which is that broader area, and culture shock within that. So it is generally a given that cultural adjustment depends a lot on the circumstances of our migration, or how it is and why we've traveled. So today, to be clear, I'm talking about the stages of cultural adjustment within voluntary travel, all right? The area of involuntary travel is very significant, and perhaps maybe I'll urge my colleagues at Inter Alia to think about a topic like this in the future. So today we're thinking more about the professional who travels around the world. We're thinking about people who travel socially. Perhaps they decide to have a family, to join a partner elsewhere. And of course, we're talking about students who are traveling. Simply put, there are a number of stages within cultural adjustment for each one of us who travels. And let's look at the scenario of the student for this purpose today. Typically, any of our traveling students will experience one or two of this entire group of phases, not necessarily all of them. We expect students to experience a honeymoon phase. They're excited about their travel. They know a little bit about what they'll be experiencing. And it's all that enthusiasm that comes with either the idea of the experience of something new. So it may be that they have this honeymoon phase when they realize that they will travel, or maybe they experience it on a plane, or in fact, maybe they enjoy that while they're on location. And it's said that it lasts from a minute to about 3 months. Our next stage is a bit of a challenge. And in fact, this is universally known as the culture shock spot. The plummet, or the dramatic change from the honeymoon phase to culture shock, is pretty fast. That is the one typical thing that is frequent and common. So during the culture shock stage, which we expect to last roughly 2 weeks to a couple of months, it is when all that discomfort sets in, distress, the unpleasant part of the process. A little after this stage, and sometimes feeding into the next phase, we have reintegration. This is typically a conscious effort. So we are consciously trying to spread out into our immediate new community. Perhaps we are trying to reestablish that sense of belonging somewhere. After this, we have the stage of autonomy, where we realize that actually I am part of this community, but I can operate independently. So in my eyes looking backwards, sometimes this was visible when the group of students who suddenly glued together during the semester and traveled in groups of 20 around Athens suddenly realized that actually, no, it's okay to break out in a group of 2 or 3, or in fact, it's okay for me to travel around this crazy city where I don't speak the language by myself. So that's the autonomy phase. Next, we have the adaptation phase. The adaptation phase is pretty much the ideal point you want to be at living in a new location. You want to have experienced a couple of the previous phases. You want to have engaged comprehensively. You want to have been challenged and not felt comfortable while you've assimilated. And you want to have consciously considered your learning development experience while you're doing so. And then after we've completed this wonderful set of experiences, when we return to where it was that we came from, we have this whole cycle happening again. And that is the re-entry stage. It's interesting when we think about this stage in terms of students, because whether we experience this strongly, any of these phases, whether we remember experiencing them, whether they're very clear to us, or perhaps we feel that we kind of sailed through a couple of them, we are aware socially of how examples of these phases have played out before us. So many of us have, in fact, displaced parents who would have experienced some of these. And we know these anecdotally of stories we've heard from. We have friends who have traveled. We hear the many stereotypes, the cultural stereotypes that exist. And it's this kind of familiarity with the idea of cultural integration that sometimes poses more of the challenge. So this is what we tend to have learned before we actually experience it, unless we have a systematic preparation for all of these things. So defining culture shock, let me move us to this side. The readily accepted definition of culture shock is a sense of confusion and uncertainty, sometimes with feelings of anxiety that may affect people exposed to a new culture or environment without adequate preparation. Now, from an educative, psychological, and social perspective, this is quite a minimal definition. It's very simple, and it doesn't quite include a number of the things that people experience in culture shock. For example, there is a neurological impact of culture shock, which is in fact permanent. Don't worry, it doesn't mean that is trauma. It actually means that when we experience something to the extent that it shifts our entire cultural understanding, our brain is actually rewired. So we carry that forward. In fact, there's a Greek saying that when I travel, my brain broadens and it never goes back to its initial place again. Culture shock also includes physical symptoms of distress, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I've mentioned the permanent impact of transformation, but more importantly, no two people will share the exact same experience, which is very important to remember. Many people will sail through cultural experiences. They may have engaged well, or they may have not engaged. They may have just experienced them superficially. Whether they experience culture shock or not doesn't really represent a lot of that process, because there are so many other phases of cultural integration. So what does cultural shock feel like? Let's begin with that. Many of us have been on a trip that has taken us somewhere where we are completely unfamiliar with the culture there, or perhaps we've read all about it and we think we're ready. Some of the symptoms we could call that you experience would be numbness, irritability, so that kind of frustration with most challenges in a daily basis, feeling homesickness and a little helpless, feeling disorientated, unable to kind of get yourself into a routine and operate like you typically would, feelings of sadness, anxiety, an inability to sleep, is a significant one. And I think we might all be able to agree that the inability to sleep is something that comes with perhaps every major change in life. A loss or gain of appetite, fatigue or being hyperactive, and an inability to concentrate. Basically, you're uncomfortable, right? You may be displaying one of these, or you may be displaying another 30 that exist. In observing colleagues, friends, family, or students, we would see that the individuals experiencing culture shock may have lost kind of their emotional equilibrium. So someone who's typically calm and collected might suddenly display that frustration. Pre-existing mental health issues can become amplified during the experience of culture shock. In fact, they can become amplified when you travel to a new environment. So it's quite important to take this into account when we're talking about culture shock. Culture shock can be something that you talk through and overcome. It can also signify the beginning of a significant mental health challenge, which is why it's important to always take into consideration the professionals we have available. Alienation, so we might notice that one of the members of our group is suddenly taking a lot of time to themselves. Perhaps one of the people we're viewing is becoming very critical of the host culture. I've labeled here naive realism or ethnocentric value basing, and these are actually terms that we use in describing the kind of attitude that might be displayed by someone who's experiencing culture shock. And what they mean in a nutshell is an expectation that our cultural values are shared by everyone. So that naive realism is thinking that everyone has the same standards as you. And ethnocentric value basing is trying to make sense of that experience based on those cultural values that you bring with you from your very specific cultural context that you come from. We would probably see these individuals facing difficulties with their daily routines, and most definitely for those of us who also view their kind of professional performance or academic performance, there would be a change there as well. Now, I mentioned a lot of these characteristics that would be noticed in someone with culture shock, but culture shock isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, a number of theories and studies exist out there discussing that an individual who is more susceptible to experiencing culture shock might be more susceptible based on their personality, their mental will, their mental health, their strength, and their ability. These studies have never actually been proven soundly. So it is as much likely for an education psychologist who has, 30 years of experience traveling and looking at intercultural learning to experience culture shock, as much as it's likely for a student who has never traveled out of their state in the US to experience it while abroad. There are two things that can help, and those are the management of expectations and preparation leading up to that cultural experience. So now I'm going to invite back my colleague, Drew Lightfoot. I've mentioned that he's the program manager for England and Wales at Arcadia University. He'll be talking of examples of cross-cultural experiences. And you should know that Drew is an educational doctorate candidate in educational leadership with a focus on systematic barriers in study abroad. So go ahead, Drew.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and thank you, Inter Alia, for having me today. My name is Drew Lightfoot, and I've spent a decade working in international education programs for both inbound international students coming to the US for study, and with outbound US students traveling to programs all over the world, including England and Wales, which I've most recently been working with. I've also been in the shoes of students in this situation as a study abroad student, and I've worked overseas for a few years as a young professional before returning to the US. So I'm really thrilled to share some of my experiences with culture shock with all of you. So I've kind of broken these down into 4 topic areas. Firstly, expectations versus reality of the not yet known. So Joanna's kind of mentioned a few of these ideas already, but your expectations about what life will be like and your experience will be like in your new culture may differ from what you expected. Many people imagine that it'll be less challenging in their new culture for many reasons. Maybe they already speak the language of their host country. Even if you do, it's doubtless that you will still experience challenges around culture shock. You may not have the local accent or share other cultural norms of the community that you're living in. For folks who share heritage with the local community, but may have been raised elsewhere, this can be a common challenge. They still may be seen as an outsider, questioned for why they aren't fully fluent, as they may be expected to be. They may have other cultural traits that set them apart from the local community. I spent a few years in Korea when I was younger, and this was a common challenge for many of my Korean American friends. They were expected to act, speak, dress, and fill the part of a native Korean, but were often not able to blend in the way that they may have expected to be able to before relocation. You may expect one experience, and things may not be what you imagined it would be like. If you can, before embarking on your journey, connect with others who have lived in the local community to help you prepare for what's ahead for you. Explore YouTube, other online forums, and do your research before departure. And just know that it will be different than what you expect in one way or another. Living life as an outsider in your community. For many of the American students in which I work with, study abroad is their first experience navigating life as an other or as an outsider. The way you look, your skin, your hair color, the way you carry yourself, your clothing, your accent, or your outward appearance may signal that you are not from the local community. This is challenging for folks, especially for those who intend to remain in their host community for a longer amount of time. Fully integrating into the local culture can feel impossible. I tell my students to expect to be uncomfortable and to feel out of place. They may not be, in on the cultural references. They may feel isolated, exhausted, or excluded. These experiences are incredibly common, and it's part of culture shock. Finding community. So many folks find solace in connecting with others that share identities or have shared interests. You may find other expats from your home community, a local bar where people from your home country or language family might hang out. You might find others who share your profession or your sports or hobby interests to sort of help bridge that gap of, get through the cultural shock period. Building community is one way to overcome your feelings of isolation and exclusion. And many of the folks I've worked with, as well as myself, have found that connecting with others who are going through this experience is really helpful in navigating your new culture and finding your place within it. And lastly, becoming a cultural ambassador. So folks embark on cross-cultural experiences for different reasons, as Joanna mentioned. Sometimes they choose to do so out of curiosity and excitement, and other times they don't have a choice, and they are forced by circumstance to live in a new culture or country. Regardless of why, people are often expected to represent the culture that they came from. And this may be your first experience feeling like you have to be an ambassador for the country in which you come from or the culture in which you come from. Folks that I've worked with, both in the US and overseas, have commented on pressure to be a cultural ambassador, meaning like a representative from your host country, from your home country, I should say. They may be asked to explain the political situation in your home country. They may have assumptions put on them based off of cultural assumptions. They like a certain, people think you like a certain kind of food, or you have a particular worldview because you come from a specific location. If you've been privileged to embark on this experience out of curiosity and excitement, try to reconnect with those feelings and the reasons why you decided to go through this in the first place. Embrace the unknown and know that it's normal to have expectations placed onto you around being a cultural ambassador. And in many ways, when you return to your home country, you may experience kind of the opposite phenomena where you may want to share your cross-cultural experiences with others from your host country, and you become sort of that reverse cultural ambassador from the country where you were studying or staying. All right, well, I was happy to share these perspectives with you. I'll toss it back to Joanna.
Thank you, Drew. That was actually a brilliant set of examples helping us basically contextualize everything we've spoken about. So there are a number of things that can help with culture shock. And one key kind of point to remember, Drew mentioned a sense of community. It's quite important when we are traveling with others in any kind of context to make sure that we are offering support within our group, just like we would personally expect it. And this applies to whether we are traveling with friends, just as much as it applies to whether we're a group of students or professionals going somewhere all together. So when you find yourself in that uncomfortable position, and if you do have culture shock, create a routine of some kind for yourself. Give yourself things to get used to, reestablish that equilibrium that you experience on your daily basis. Use the resources that are available to you. When we're shocked or we're stunned, we tend to kind of get lost in that emotion and we forget, for example, that Google Maps, 6 years ago when I was talking to students in Athens, it was impossible to help them visualize the city unless we were drawing out a map. Google Maps is available. Just an example, there are so many online resources in this day and age that can help. So any challenge you're experiencing, you might want to look into it, whether it's language, whether it's the geographical location, whether it's finding out kind of cultural behaviors and traditions that you would like to be more familiar with. Keep connected to your new environment. It's human nature when something surprises us to kind of draw back into the comfort of our bedroom and our laptop. Try to stay connected to that new environment as much as you can. Very difficult to do during a lockdown, very different, but possible. Sometimes it means reaching out socially and kind of relying on that. Uncomfortable and tiring, but if you find yourself feeling isolated, that's one way to move forward. Embrace the idea that this is a challenge that you can work through. Drew highlighted how important it was for him to tell students at the beginning of any experience that these feelings are common and they will more than likely experience them. Absolutely true. Recognize the new skills you're developing and using. A cultural integrative experience has a steep learning curve, but it's a very valuable one that you return to every time you move outside of your comfort zone, but also every time you network or work and communicate with people who are of a different culture than your own. Try to include relaxation in your routine. Most of us are feeling a little bit Zoom fatigued at the moment. And, you know, it's true of any cultural experience that we tend to get drawn in and kind of everyone's laughing because you understand and identify to get drawn into this ongoing cycle, whether it's one of you being in a new location and seeing all these new stimuli, or it's one of you being remotely at home and receiving all these invitations and discussions. Exercise, eat well and hydrate. Initiate contact socially. Try to avoid focusing on criticism. Another human tendency when we are in our kind of fight or flight mode is to find someone to blame for what we're experiencing. Try to balance that out. When you catch yourself criticizing, try to rein it in. Try to kind of reestablish what it is that you're feeling. Recognize how you're feeling. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, you should be learning from it. You are in between your old identity and a new one when experiencing culture shock. So be patient in finding your balance. Give yourself a break. That's my son. Don't hesitate to reach out for help in your immediate environment. Talk to a friend, a colleague, a supervisor or tutor, and perhaps more importantly, remember that there are health professionals for you to reach out to. Some of the indications of culture shock are very close to the signifying characteristics of other mental health issues like depression. So it's quite important when you're feeling uncomfortable not to hesitate to reach out for help. I moved this in the wrong place, there we go. So offering support and resources for those of us who will find ourselves in a position responsible for individuals or just traveling in a group, it's important to support vulnerable groups as a priority. Those vulnerable groups are people who we know are experiencing underlying mental health issues, or perhaps they have expressed to us that they're facing a challenge or they're worried about this cultural experience. Preparation and awareness encourage people traveling to prepare. Have that discussion that Drew was talking about with them as much as possible. Have that discussion yourself with your peers before a trip and keep that ongoing dialogue. Use the resources available. Establish relationships and access to resources is a good piece of advice. and a reminder. Offer support with care, don't be critical. Sometimes a culture shock, the reasons for it, or the way an individual explains their experience doesn't quite resonate with us. That doesn't mean we have a license to negate it. In fact, we should try and figure what is that significant and how is it impacting that individual. And of course, like I said before, always seek professional help. So far, we've been talking about the discomfort of culture shock, and a reminder now that it's part of that very rich process of cultural integration. That is the goal, to integrate culturally. And culture shock is one of those kind of pivotal points that tips you in a number of locations, making that experience difficult, but occasionally richer as well when you come out on the other side. So through cultural integration, we arrive at experiencing intense self-assessment. So considering how we're feeling, why, what stimuli we're responding to, cultural learning, an abundance of it, back to that typical kind of definition we give to culture of traditions, food, music, communication, all of those things that we would hope to experience. It is perceived in students that have a rich cultural integrative experience that they gain confidence, self-reliance, and independence. So remember that cycle and reaching the adaptation point. It is great preparation for future cultural experiences. So there are some theories saying that once you have traveled a lot, at some point, it's not that culture shock gets less difficult. It's just that you can manage it a little bit differently. Intercultural fluency, which is particularly important, and equity-minded diversity. We talk a lot about diversity, and of course, with travel and all those situations that would put us in a state of culture shock and encourage us to move past it, would offer us an understanding of the diverse world we live in. But the reflective component in challenging our own cultural values and standards, in understanding a new location and a new community we're working with, is what makes us equity-minded. And this is a particularly significant part of that process. In fact, perhaps sometimes it's our goal. So we've spoken a lot about cultural integration and culture shock and tried to define it. And I'd like to take us on a small trip to end my talk and take us to a place between the Assam Bengal plain of India and the plateau of Tip and southwestern China, with a brief excerpt from a book by Jamie Zepper. It's called Beyond the Sky and Earth, A Journey into Bhutan. There is a difference between arrival and entrance. Arrival is physical and happens all at once. The train pulls in, the plane touches down, you get out of the taxi with all of your luggage. You can arrive at a place and never really enter it. You get there, look around, take a few pictures, make a few notes, send postcards home. When you travel like this, you think you know where you are, but in fact, you've never left home. Entering, on the other hand, takes longer. You cross over slowly, in bits and pieces. It is like awakening slowly over a period of weeks with the occasional nightmare. And then one morning, you open your eyes and you're finally here, really and truly here. You're just beginning to know who you are. In fact, you're just beginning to know where and who you are. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you very much. I said I had some questions in the beginning. Now I don't know how many they are. So wonderful. There are a lot of things we heard. I want to keep above all the fact that culture shock is not necessarily bad, because shock, it already sounds shocking. It sounds like something we have to avoid. And so there are a lot to talk about, but without a lot of talking right now, So after this after this theoretical preparation is not right, but after all these theoretical views, we moved to Stella. And the reason to choose Stella was that she somehow, personally and professionally, she's been always on both sides, experiencing and providing help. So Stella?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about shock in such a shocking period of time. And I'm actually glad that I'm after Drew and Joanna, and thank you very much for this very thorough presentation, because I've been listening to you, and I was thinking, where were you 8 years ago when I was in a shock and I didn't know what was happening to me, and everyone was having fun, and I was an Erasmus student and I was suffering. Now, 8 years after, I know that it was okay. And hopefully the new generations are going to be better prepared. Me personally, I'm going to share with you a personal story, and cultural shock, as we heard, but also as all of us in one way or another experience in our daily life, because I think that we can experience cultural shock even if we are not abroad, but even in our own city and country, depending where we are on the planet. But it's most probable that we would all go through this. So I will try to actually explain how, in my case, the first cultural shock that I had and the others that came after brought me where I am right now. And I'm very happy to talk afterwards in order to maybe share more points and experiences together. So I was an Erasmus student when I was 21. And this was my first experience abroad. I made a lot of friends and I had a lot of fun, but it took me really a lot of time to feel more or less integrated. So when I came back, I wanted to go again outside of my comfort zone, because I really wanted to understand if I am able to do this in the end of the day, or if it's going, this experience, to happen again and again, of me being a bit in a shock and not being able to enjoy my time exactly. So I took advantage of every scholarship of the university, and after the Erasmus, I did an Erasmus internship in Granada, in the south of Spain, where I have been just for vacations for a few days. I don't know if any one of you has ever been to Granada, but it's one of the most beautiful and safe cities of Europe. I mean, it's a bit subjective to say beautiful, but I literally have not met not even one person who said the opposite up to now. So at least to my experience, it was a very, very beautiful city, full of students, very alive, and with a lot of different cultures, and it was really nice to be there. So I went there to work in the only museum which was representing the Roma culture in the south of Spain. It belonged to a women association, and it was in one of the most beautiful areas of Granada, where a lot of years ago, a lot of years before, Roma people used to live there. So I was very happy. I knew the city and I felt very prepared to start this job. And I went to Granada. I was searching for a home. Everything was okay. And then I exchanged a couple of emails with my manager. And she said that the office where I would have to go is not where the museum is, but the address of the association is different, and it's like 20 minutes outside the center of Granada. So I said, okay. She explained how to go. So I took the bus and I entered the bus, and for the first 5-10 minutes, everything was okay. And then we were moving outside of the center, and we were moving, even if it was like time-wise not so long, it was feeling very strange, because the change of sceneries and everything started to feel very different. So I ended up being completely alone in the bus. And the driver said, okay, we are here. This is the last stop and I cannot go more inside because it's very dangerous. So we have to stop here. So I said, okay. I was speaking Spanish. So I was communicating with him in Spanish. It was quite challenging because in the South, the pronunciation is very strong, but still I could manage more or less. So I was speaking the language, I got off the bus, and I was feeling that I am in a ghetto kind of area. I was feeling very strange because a lot of houses and buildings were not in a good shape. There was no one in the street, and I was, I got this feeling because I was not prepared at all, and also I came from a 20 minutes bus ride from the paradise of Spain, and I was feeling very, very strange. So after like 10 seconds, there was a woman who was selling socks on the street, and she came to me and she started to shout, and she was telling me, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. Who are you? Here people steal and they rape, and they were very violent with my husband last night, and you shouldn't be here. So I was very shocked. I was trying to explain to her that I'm here for my traineeship, there is this association. And then she was so anxious about me that she left the shocks. And we went together. She walked with me, which was literally like 3 minutes, a 3 minutes walk from the bus stop, to get me to the office and make sure that I'm safe. I was not really, I was feeling strange, but I was not feeling that I'm in a danger or anything. But all of this experience made me feel very, very shocked. And I started to be very stressed and ask myself, what did I get myself into? So I entered the office, and there were two ladies, and they were really nice with me. They never mentioned anything before I would go about the fact that the office is in a different direction, in a different address, and that this area is basically a Roma-based area, and they didn't provide me with information about the job they do. So I was feeling very, very shocked for some moments, and they were very nice, and they were explaining things to me. They told me that it was not obligatory for me to be part of the association, but if I would wish to, it would be really helpful for them. And if I would wish to, I could stay only working in the museum. So the only thing I could think back then was just that I wanted to go back to my safe zone somehow, and I could not imagine myself working there. Because I was feeling very unprotected because of all the incidents that happened. However, they invited me to a big celebration of the neighborhood, which would happen the day after, in the night, at like 7 o'clock in the evening. So I went back, and I had already some friends, acquaintances more than friends, and I told them yes. So it seems that I'm invited there, and I'm going to work there. And people who, it happened to be Spanish friends who were living there for a lot of time, and they told me, we never go there, it's very dangerous, please be very careful, take care of yourself. So I was really not sure whether I should go or not. But anyways, I decided to give it a chance and go. And this is where I think a life change started for me, because I realized that this association is very, very important for this neighborhood. It was a big room with more than 200 women everywhere. It was a big celebration, and with a lot of empowering speeches and a lot of cultural events that would follow. And right after the end of this, and of feeling how powerful this community can be, I went myself and I said, okay, I would also like to be part of this association if I can do something here. So together with another girl who later on happened to be one of my best friends, and she was from Belgium, we started to run classes of English for Roma children twice per week. And of course, I wouldn't say that I belonged in this community, but I was definitely a part of this community. And after 5-6 months of being there twice a week, I felt the challenges of a different culture, and I felt the challenges of a completely different environment. But I also realized that there is a lot of, in this specific case, and later on with a lot of different experiences in general, a lot of stigma around, I don't know, a specific culture because of other external conditions as well. So after I got back to Athens, and in the meantime, I was also working in the museum, so I was partly in this area and partly in the center. I started to volunteer with refugee populations, and I was more and more interested in children's rights and human rights. And it happened that I got a position in a big international organization in Athens. I was the volunteer coordinator for internal and external volunteers, meaning local program-based volunteers and volunteers who would go abroad on missions. And one thing that I was trying to share with them, apart from the practicalities, is that a culture shock, first of all, most of the times has both sides, because it's not only the person who, me in this story, who I got shocked by the differences and not being prepared of a lot of different cultural, of a lot of different cultural differences, and of feeling challenged, but also the population itself and the people that I was working with of all different ages were very challenged by me because of my color, because of where I was coming from, because of me not being able to speak very well or perfectly well anyways the language. So it's a both sides game. And also one thing that I kept in mind is that I really realized from this experience, but also the other experiences that I was having throughout the years, because it happened that because of my job, I traveled a lot, and because I also liked to travel by myself, I made a lot of trips. I realized my privileges as a person, as a white European woman, middle class economically. And I realized that this is something that I should keep in mind always and use this privilege for a good purpose as much as I can, because a culture shock can also reveal parts of us that make us sometimes feel guilty, maybe without wanting it. In my case, I was feeling guilty because I was feeling that, wait a minute, I regard myself as a person who is very inclusive and accepting, and now I feel like I have like this kind of I don't know, feeling that is like is as if I would be a racist, but I know I'm not a racist. Well, unfortunately, we were raised in this society, and I think we have a lot of a constant fight with ourselves to learn more and to understand more and more our position in the world and other people's position in the world. So I'm sure I was, and I am up to a point, no matter how much I try, racist, sexist, and other values that I would like to be away from me, because of the way that I have been raised. And so I keep this in mind, and I always think, no matter where I am, of this privilege, and of the fact that sometimes a culture is characterized, no, like some characteristics are characterized because of the culture, but sometimes it's because of the circumstances. So for example, in this example of this specific Roma community, everyone was saying that it's very dangerous there, and like Roma people can be very dangerous, but it's not about the Roma culture and Roma people being dangerous. It's about poverty, social and political and economical circumstances of a specific tactic, which can make the situation difficult and the culture stigmatized, which we also see in the COVID-19, I'm sure, everywhere all over the world. It's not the same thing to be a Roma person, a homeless person, an LGBTQ person, and so on in such a crisis. And it's not the same to be in a position like I am, for example. So just taking it from what also Joanna said, I think a culture shock is always a shock because of what the meaning of the word is, but also it can be a very good and one of the most significant actually opportunities if we take the best advantage out of it to realize a lot of things about ourselves, and not only in a daily context of survival and of work and of everything, but also in a political context and in an activist context. So this is what I would like to bring from my side, and this is what I try to do with all my love with the volunteers. Yes, this is my short story. And now I'm in Strasbourg, so it's a new cultural shock for me here. I don't speak the language also, so I'm again in this mode of I want my safe zone. So I think it's a non-stop experience, but it's building up our qualities and our values. And thank you very much for having the chance to share this today. And I stop. I don't know, maybe I talked a lot.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you so much. Thank you for, so first for the bus story, because I also have a lonely bus story that stops somewhere and leaves you alone with your fears and the feeling of, how to say, expanding the comfort zone or going back to the bus. So more questions on my side here, piling on the list. But thank you above all for touching on the topic of privilege, about our self-consciousness about it and the way we handle it. In fact, we can talk a lot about many things, but slowly we can, we usually come back to very few topics that we can elaborate on later. So Stella faced personally the difficulties, but they somehow worked inside and worked for her professional development too. So it's an ongoing process, as we saw also from Joanna's first slide, I think. And from Stella, we're moving to Emna. So Emna was a volunteer under the European Voluntary Service Programme a few years ago here at Interalia. She will tell you all the story behind. What I want to notice here is when we were thinking how to present the guests, the speakers of today, the easiest thing comes as an ex-volunteer, but then I felt that there are no ex-volunteers, exactly as there are no ex-students. The teacher is always a teacher. And so here with Emna, we spent the 6 full months together. They were full of exchange, of giving and taking. We, as organization, but me also as Boyka, we learned a lot from Emna. And now we are really happy to welcome her as a volunteer of Interalia. Thank you, Emna. Now it's your time.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Okay, as Stella did before, I will also share my personal experience with the culture shock. And I will tell you about 2 kinds of culture shock that I had during my life. One during my childhood, and one during the EVS that I did with Interalia 2 years ago. And I am glad that Joanna shared with us the last thing that shared with us from that book, that it was very interesting, because I really found myself in that passage. So the first culture shock that I experienced was during my childhood, because I live in Italy, but I am from Northern Africa. So when I was a child, I was forced to move in another country. And I think that this kind of migration, it was very difficult for me, because I was forced to leave my friends, my comfort zone, and to learn to live in another different country, and I was forced also to learn a new language, a new habits, a new way to communicate with the other people around me. And when I found a routine, I was forced to move back to my country of origin, because my parents were thinking about moving back to their country. So after after I found new friends in a new country, I moved back in my country of origin. And it was a little bit challenging, because in the meanwhile, I forgot how to speak Arabic. So I had to learn again to communicate with my friends and my family. But after 2 years of this moving back, I went back to Italy. So in this, the first 10 years of my childhood were very challenging, related to culture shock, because I must say, the second time that I moved to Italy, but since then I am still here, so I lived in Italy since then. But the second time was very difficult, because in the meanwhile I forgot how to speak Italian, so I had to learn again from the beginning, and it was challenging, because I had like my friends, like I lost my old friends in Tunisia, and I found myself very lonely, and I was only 10 years old, so I wanted to have new friends and to do the things that every child do. To play with other children, but it was very difficult, because in the meanwhile I forgot the language. So I think that the communication is the first thing that help to integrate in a new place. So if you don't know the language, it is very difficult to communicate with others. So this kind of culture shock, I must say, it was very challenging. But after 20 years, I'm still here, so I still live in Italy, and I found my routine. I found a different way to integrate myself. I work here. I did all my studies here in Italy. I have a lot of friends, but I'm still feeling that I'm not 100% Italian, because I have the physical characteristics reminds me always that I'm not Italian because of my color of skin or because of the characteristics of my face. So sometimes people remind me that I am not 100% Italian. For example, a couple of months ago, I went at the municipality for some documents, and one of the workers there asked me if I can write in Italian, because he thought that because I am migrant, I was not able to write in Italian. So this thing is this kind of things are always said, because in Italy there are many people that are living here. We are a very big community from Northern Africa that are living here. We have our so we did school here, we work here, we pay taxes here, but it is people still remind us that we are not Italian 100%. This kind of thing still make me sad, but I have to say that growing up, it is easier to manage this kind of episodes. But back then, when I was a child, it was very difficult because I was very lonely without any reference. And when Joanna was explaining the different things that a person can experience during a culture shock, I found myself in her words because of the sadness, the feeling of anxiety, the feeling of the fear of doing wrong. It was always a part of me during my childhood, because I wasn't feeling a part of a community. So I was always anxious to do the best of me, to show the people that I am just like them. But growing up, this feeling is I could manage this feeling in an easier way. So this brings me to the second culture shock that I experienced. But I'm very glad to say that the second experience was very nice for me. When in 2018 I did my voluntary European, the EVS in Interalia. So I was a volunteer there in Athens. I prepared myself in advance, so I studied a lot. I studied the new country, the city, how to move there, so how metro lines there was in the city, the particular dishes that I wanted to try. So I was very prepared to do this travel, to do this experience. So I think that my 6 months in Athens was all the phase of the honeymoon. So I didn't have a very struggle there. Also because I found that with Interalia was very inclusive because they Boica organized very often occasion of bringing people together, and I remember very well also our welcome dinner, and I think that this kind of occasion were very important, because I really didn't feel any struggle living there 6 months, even if I was aware that I was not very well in speaking English at first, but also the fact that I was with another Italian girl in the house, it helped me because I had a reference there of the Italian community. So I was really glad to live there. So I don't think that I experienced a culture shock while I was living in Athens. And also because I think that I was also prepared to this kind of emotions, because I had the first culture shock in my childhood, that so I was used to it. And I think that one thing that Joanna said before, it is very true for me, because once I experienced this kind of culture shock, I think that now that I am an adult and I can choose to travel, to stay in a new place, to prepare myself to know experience a new country, now it is easy for me, because I was not forced to move to Greece to do my voluntary experience there. So I moved in Greece with this awareness. But in the first time in my childhood, I was forced to move in another country, and I was forced to live there all my security and comfort zone. So it was much worse, that experience. So this is all for me.
Thank you, Emna, very much. Now you really reminded me of the way we used to do here. Right now, these things don't happen through Zoom. It's not the same. We cannot cook and share together, of which I'm very sorry, because so one of my questions would be, and it's going to all, can you get, so are you, so there are two questions probably with the same. So it's probably the same question with two ends, but one is exactly what Emna was talking about. When do you become 100% Italian? When this cycle stops and you start feeling local, let's say, because I am also a foreigner, a stranger in Greece. However, after more than 20 years here, I feel much more local. I cannot say Greek, but I feel much more foreign and strange when I go to visit my family back home in Bulgaria. So, and I'm really not aware right now. Am I still experiencing this cycle? I would say no, but there are these calls for becoming a cultural ambassador. I would call it differently, but it is happening all the time, and we can talk about this part later. So on the one hand, does this cycle ever stop? And on the other, can you get addicted to it? And can you get addicted to this feeling? As Stella said, I was feeling very strange. It was difficult, but as soon as it was over, I wanted to live it over again. So I'm not sure if these are two questions or this is the same. But anyway, I hope you got it, and this will be the first thing that in somehow embraces all four of you. And of course, as all the inputs have been delivered, all the audience is welcome to share your questions either.
Okay, I don't know if I can share the reply to this question. So I feel exactly the same when I go back to my origin country, because even if I don't feel 100% Italian, I feel much more Italian than Tunisian, because when I come back to my country, I feel a stranger there, because now I get to use to live here. I assimilated all the habits, all the cultural habits here in Italy. So when now it is 8 years that I didn't went to Tunisia, but when I was there 8 years ago, I felt a little bit like it is not my country anymore. So now I cannot say that I am Tunisian or Italian. I don't know yet, maybe half and a half. But I think that this kind of feeling is still the remaining of the culture shock that I experienced. I don't know. I think that it will accompany me during all my life.
I think it's a good debate to understand if it's even possible to become fully, a new from a different culture. Like, I personally kind of feel like there's a lot of gray area, and as you mentioned, Bokia, like not fully becoming, you can't really fully become someone from the new culture if you aren't from that culture. And there are so many layers to like integration. And I from many people I've spoken to who've, immigrants to the United States who've been here for 20 years are still do not fully feel American, And of course, we have our own sort of different structure about what we consider to be American and what isn't. And there are always challenges around that for sure with immigrants in this country. And I definitely agree to the feeling that of being sort of in between sometimes. People who've their lives have crossed multiple countries and cultures often feel kind of partly at home in some places and others, and it's always kind of this spectrum. But I personally am not sure that I don't know if I really believe that someone can become fully, from a different place.
Well, I didn't have this experience. I am certainly not integrated in the French context for now, because it's been very short, the periods where I've been out of Greece. It's been like 6 months, maybe 7 months, and then back and then again. So I, of course, don't have the same experience. But I have the same question, Boyka. I'm like, I don't know, because life can bring you a lot of challenging situations and life choices. And for example, in my case, that I have a partner who is not Greek, and we are both now in a place that is neither of for us our home. It's like a lot of mixed feelings in our minds in this new environment, and I think we are constantly in a culture shock for different reasons, also between us. So I think the more technology is expanding and the more people can be connected in different ways, and they can meet, and traveling was not the same, not even like 10-15 years ago. So it can be very challenging. So I really don't know what to answer to this. Yes, I guess there can be multiple places where we can feel what is said like home, but I don't know if we can have the same comfort feeling exactly. But I also think that we can choose our home, and we can choose what we feel more inside us. And it's not about the origin exactly. It's about the feelings and the belonging. And I think it's a sense. So, yeah.
I think maybe just to help try to answer that question, not exactly to answer it, it might be useful to remember that every incident where you feel uncomfortable culturally, whether it's culture shock or just a little challenge, is one static part of who you are forever, which means that you're the thing that's moving and everything about you and around you is organic. You have different people, different experiences. So one, you can never return to who you were before, but also the new you is constantly evolving. So how you feel, I think, will always change how we all feel. And just to add to the tiny personal stories, I grew up in the UK and I moved to Greece then. And I worked there for a very long time. And when I moved to Greece in 2008, I was thinking, there's so much olive oil in the food and everyone is so loud and everyone walks so slowly everywhere. You're in a rush and you cannot get anywhere. I moved back to the UK 14 years later, this past October. I cannot find olive oil that I like anywhere or enough of it. Everyone is just running all over the place and I'm highly critical of that. I don't understand why they don't just walk a little bit more slowly. And everyone speaks quietly and I'm thinking, but why do they bottle it up? So I think for every experience, and you know, we're talking about the significant ones here, but for every experience we have, there will always be those circumstances that tip the scale. And you know, that is actually the healthy response though. That's the thing to remember. If we were sailing through and we were unaffected, it would mean that we're not actually engaging with anything around us.
Thank you, host, that you like to unmute me. So our audience is quite quiet, but this doesn't mean we are finished, because I wanted, so the key to everything we heard somehow always brings back the word preparation. Yet from the Webster's definition, there was without adequate preparation. Then the word preparation appeared many times, but then there was one point that Joanna said, that you can be for 30 years managing and facilitating and working in this area with the people who experience culture shock and still be subject to it, just being aware of it. And one part of, so why we are all doing this, it's exactly to be aware and to know how to provide help and assistance to a person who is experiencing culture shock. And yet, from when we were still discussing what we're going to talk about today, I wanted to ask, how is it possible and how can one provide self-assistance? Because there is so, Joanna, you also said from the beginning, always ask for help, don't hesitate, and so on. However, in our highly competitive society, asking for help is somehow a sign of weakness and is really not very tolerated, because especially when we are students and we're going abroad, we want to excel, we want to be the best, we want to show our best. So asking for help automatically shows a weakness, and which is equal to not the best. Therefore, this readiness to acknowledge the fact that you need help is, how to say, is very deeply rooted in our minds, that it's not a good idea. And so my first question, exactly springing from this, how do we provide self-assistance? And then are there ways to, how to say, promote this help aspect and somehow just say that asking for help is like talking to a friend or is a normal need? That, I don't know, the help part is another one, but I think it's crucial also to mention here. First, the self-help part.
As a psychologist, I'll give one piece of advice on that rather than a testimonial for now. When you begin talking about a problem, what happens socially, whether it's a friend or a group, is you will automatically see that other people are sharing the same experience and probably didn't mention it for the same reasons you didn't. So in the cultural shock context, I think it's very important, culture shock, to remember that as soon as you're open about your experience, you'll find people who can also identify. So one, try to be as open as you can. Even if you're just asking people how they feel, you might open up a discussion without saying, I need help. My second point, though, is challenge that understanding that seeking help isn't good. Nobody would go anywhere without reaching out for help. And all of us, I mean, you're right, Boyka, even as we mature professionally, we know that we think that it might be a sign of weakness to show that we're not excelling at something and that we're asking for help. Actually, once you receive that help, you will see how far you will be excelling after that. So I think that we should most definitely be challenging that notion that we shouldn't be asking for help. I think we should always be asking for help. And in fact, the things you will learn in terms of coping strategies from friends, colleagues, peers, forums on the internet of people talking about experiences will always be far, far richer than anything you could discover by yourself, especially for culture shock.
Thank you. Yeah, starting the discussion on the challenge, the help part is seems really crucial. And one more that I think all can offer inputs is how often, because I'm sure it is possible to experience cultural shock without moving, staying at home. This reverse part, how it works, and yeah, all the details around. Because yeah, we were talking, so we have put a framework of moving abroad for study or for work. But yeah, the example of the COVID experience is exactly this. But okay, this pandemic, we truly believe will be over sooner or later, hopefully sooner. In any case, with or without it, the culture shock upon return, or even being just the hosting part, how it works. I'm sure all four have inputs on this, because you realize the fact that you were culturally shocked once changing. So going back home, you go through the same cycle. So it's not addressed to anybody concretely, but probably inputs of all four will build up an answer.
If I may say something to this, because I agree, like I also brought it before, how it's like a vice versa situation. Maybe it can be even more challenging in some cases, because I don't know, whether you have been in an experience abroad and you come back home and you feel that you don't fit in exactly, or if you never really move, but you get in touch with different people bringing their own diverse culture in your own place, or in a work context that maybe you can only work online, but still you have colleagues who are all over the world, and even the way they could, I don't know, write an email, even this, it could be completely different. So I don't know, sometimes I think it can feel, or in my experience, I think it can feel more tough. And sometimes I feel that I have more responsibility and bigger guilt of dealing with it. Because at first, I mean, because it feels that maybe I'm doing something wrong and I cannot like deal with it, or, you know, I don't know, these feelings of like, I'm talking about the challenging parts, because of course there are also nice parts, but there are maybe some behaviors or some parts that are completely different, and then we try to make them fit in, or we go back to our loved ones after an experience and we see that we cannot exactly communicate, and it's, I don't know, for some time, or even we are changed in some things forever, and then it's very strange. And I think that, I don't know, I would conclude to the same argument, that it needs help and support from people who can understand it. It needs patience, and I think it's a constant challenge of our own position and of where we stand, which is our situation also, and whether we would be open to move a little bit as well, whether we would have the patience to, even if we would not be expected, let's say, to try and open up and share our points of view, the changes that have been made inside us. So I would put it in this context, but I think it needs support, because it's difficult. It's always difficult in every context. Maybe ask questions. Asking questions is a good thing, and I think we are very afraid of doing that. Also to each other.
If I could speak into this as well. So, even within your local community, if you're, where you grew up and this is, where you are, there's so much complexity to culture of the different folks who are present in your communities. And that, a lot of this time working with US students, they kind of live in a bubble of their culture, even though there may be, very diverse communities around them. They may not interact with each other, and lots of systemic reasons for that. Sort of laws divide people in different neighborhoods, and history, stereotypes and fears and all those sorts of things play into this, not being able to cross those cultures. And so, folks from the dominant culture often are super blinded to the idea that, they could still be having these kinds of cultural shock situations, within their local community. And so, yeah, certainly a thing with our US students here. Maybe they've never even been to a certain neighborhood, they've never felt out of place, and that they start to see that for the first time, and it can be very surprising to them. The other direction often is not the case for students who are not the dominant culture, for folks who grew up, non-white, basically, in the US, are very fluent in white culture, the dominant culture here. So I think those kinds of cross-cultural experiences that a student or a person going to another country is actually quite similar to going to another part of the city in which they grew up, or a different part of this country, which is quite diverse too. So I think that there are so many layers to that folks intersect in different ways in situations where they might not realize, or they might not expect to, like in work, in school, in all the different systems where you have to intersect cultures. And that could be a serious challenge for folks from the dominant culture. So I, as much as possible, like to set up situations where people have to go outside of their comfort zone, even if it doesn't mean traveling to another place.
If we don't have any more inputs on this question, Joanna, did you just unmute it?
I did. I unmuted because I noticed the question in the chat from Noah Chris. Alex, I think you were going to read it.
To ask the question. Yeah. Okay, so thank you. So Noah is saying, "Dear all, I need to leave our conversation. Thank you for sharing knowledge and experience. The question is, do you think that there are personality traits such as adaptability that help or make it more difficult for some people to get over the shock?" So it's not specified to which this is addressed. So please, Joanna.
So I'm not sure that there are personality traits per se. There are a couple of studies that say that there are personality traits, but these studies aren't actually that sound, so they're not really dependable. What does help is ensuring that there is preparation and perhaps expectation management for individuals before they travel or have a big cultural experience. Having said that, there is a lot of evidence suggesting that the more cultural experiences we have, so perhaps a person who has traveled to 30 countries might find it more easy to manage their cultural integration to a country and culture that they have never been before compared to someone who hasn't actually traveled at all. We might be able to correlate personality traits to a person who picks to travel more, but I wouldn't say that it's the personality traits that makes it more difficult or easy to respond or experience culture shock. It's a really good question.
Our time is really running. And I have one very simple question. It can be based either on experience or on research. Thank you, Joanna, for also challenging some of the published research so far. And how to say, having the critical eye to pick. So preparation, but what it means. Emna said the language and some details about where you're going, but somehow this is information and how it goes vis-a-vis the feeling. And I don't know what it means, preparation.
Drew might.
How we can prepare? Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I stopped. And how we can prepare ourselves and the others? So what it means? They need to know the map. Yes, exactly how the streets are, or the language. Of course, it's not easy. It's not the same to learn English and all the other languages in the world. But what can be the proper preparation for somebody who is going to live and travel abroad?
I was going to mention that Drew might be able to add something to what I'm about to say, since he's got that experience preparing students for this type of experience. But I would say that we generally split preparation in cultural content and mental stuff. So the cultural content are the various things that you would expect someone to know about the place and the skills that they would need, language, you know, to make sure they have the maps, they know the address they're going to, they know how to purchase a cell phone and things like that. But then there is a big part of preparation that is sometimes omitted, or it is perhaps not considered as significant as it actually is. And that mental part is sometimes as simple as prepare to feel uncomfortable, prepare to feel irritable, prepare to need to reach out to people even though you don't want to. You want to wear your pajamas all day, you want to sit in your room and, you know, order pizza, which makes you feel comfortable. Prepare to challenge that. So that mental support is particularly necessary because it's the tricky bit. It's also the element of travel that is taken for granted. I'm very comfortable everywhere, so I'll be comfortable when I travel, you know, to Greece, for example. But that's not how it works, because it may be, Emna mentioned an experience, and I've seen it in a number of students. It may be that you're feeling very comfortable in the location you are. You've overcome all the typical hurdles, but then you have to go to a deeply bureaucratical office for a legal piece of documentation. And someone says something to you that completely throws the confidence that you had, because suddenly you feel you have a barrier that you can't control. And this is just one example of why you need to also be mentally prepared to be challenged. And I'm going to hand over to Drew.
Yeah, I think, Joanna, that was a great answer. And you hit the nail on the head, really, that we often kind of think about, like, have you read certain things? How much do you know about this place? But really the harder aspect of culture shock is dealing with vulnerability and being open to that. And so sometimes with students, I talk to them about like, have you ever, like, think of an experience that you had where you felt uncomfortable before around, you know, being out of place and being new to some place, or a new job where you felt like you were falling behind on, or you're taking a class that's like really difficult and you feel like everybody else knows what they're talking about and you feel like you have no idea what's going on. How did you cope with that in that space? Because those are the kinds of tactics or methods that you use to overcome those feelings of anxiety or discomfort or feeling out of place. Like, those are the same or similar skills that you may need to rely on while you're going through this experience. So I really agree. I think that the emotional and mental part of this intercultural experience is really kind of undervalued, and is something that you should kind of reflect a lot on your past experiences to help prepare for this future experience for you.
And I would just add one sentence only, that I think it's very important, the support groups. So people who have been through the same experience, if people who go through this experience can have access to people who can more directly understand them, because sometimes even our most loved ones who haven't been through the same experiences, they really cannot understand it. Like, they can hear and they can be there, but they cannot feel it. So I think it's very important, as much as it is as well important, I mean, all of this that was said, to also learn to say it's okay if I'm not prepared enough, because I'm never going to be prepared enough for someone telling me that I'm not Greek and Italian, and I don't know, just because they assume from specific stereotypes that, you know, we are not going. I think if someone does, I'm very happy and admiring the person, but I don't think myself I'm going to be Zen ever in my life. So just to take these experiences and build up, of course, our defenses as well, and at the good parts, but it's okay to prepare, not to be prepared sometimes also, I think.
Okay, so I'm not sure if there are any more questions. For sure, I want to talk a lot, exactly mixing the personal experience and the readiness to provide support, either to friends or to volunteers, to whoever might need it. Yeah, now that we were talking, it's very often that we do all these preparation sessions with the volunteers, then they travel, they go through all the phases, and at the end they come back, especially the volunteers that go to Africa, and they say, you know, your preparation in the beginning was good, but just to make me feel better. At the end, it was nothing. What you were saying was not, was absolutely useless. It was not like this, and so on and so on. So yeah, in the practical part, I really, how to say, value this advice here that we can split the mental and the mental preparation with the information, and just deal with these two differently. And so our participants also, I see, are falling one by one. I would, so as a last exercise, I would like just for you to say a closing phrase or something. I will keep from today this idea that the brain is expanding and is never shrinking back to the one before, which is the very positive of all this shocking session. So I don't know how you appear on your screens. I will not say the names, but I invite you just for one closing. And I really cannot help to say, Drew is in Philadelphia, and Duke, which is also here, is a collaborator of ours from Vietnam. So we really have all the, the time zones. And yeah, I really needed to mention it because of the universality of what we are saying. Hello, Duke. So yeah, it cannot be experienced by it cannot be the same for two people, but anyway, we somehow managed to put it in words to give it to give it background. So yeah, I keep the brain part, and yeah, invite you for closing to just say or share what you keep from today with the rest.
I can share. I'll definitely be taking with me the experience of having the discussion and of hearing testimonials from everyone about their culture shock experience, especially Emna and Stella, and Boyka, your little examples as well, because I think they support again the fact that if you open up your challenge, what you learn will be incredibly rich, because it has been for me personally. So thank you.
Me, I would say I'm very happy that these conversations are happening. And this means that maybe I am repeating myself a lot, but I really think it's very important that if these conversations are happening, and we think of where we are today, and we just think also of where we were some years ago, each one of us, I think it's very optimistic, the fact that we are all challenging ourselves, and that we get to really challenge ourselves and our positions and better understand where we are and how we can use our position in metaphorical and in the actual level for the best, and for education, social inclusion, equity, if we can. So this is what I would keep, and I'm very happy that I met you, and I was part of this. Very, very happy.
I'll say that I appreciate the emphasis on not necessarily learning to become a new someone from a new culture, but rather learning about yourself in that process, and that these kinds of experiences are inward as well as outward experiences about learning new skills or something like that, but also being able to process emotionally, kind of work through these kinds of experiences are good for, your future and your ability to adapt and become flexible and be really an open person as you move through your life later on.
Okay, as for me, thank you, Boyka, for giving me this opportunity to share my experience. And I will take with me today the fact that without this experience, I would not know so many people and from different cultures, from different countries. And I think that it is important to discuss about culture shock, because our world is becoming very multicultural everywhere. And the fact that we are becoming, it is so easy to travel around the world, like not now in 2020, but hope that it will be easier. And it is very important because now we had all these connections that it let us keep in touch all over the world so easily. And it is important to deal with culture shock and to know the emotions that you feel when you experience this kind of culture shock. So in order to be able to have an open mind and I think that my life, it is richer than it would be if I didn't travel and if I didn't manage this, to know these differences.
I was invited to share 2 words myself as well. So from today's conversation, I would be keeping this. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and maybe even cut 1 word out. And don't be afraid to ask the things you need to be aware of your needs, and also make it known to others, but also don't be afraid to ask questions to others to get to know what you're experiencing, and don't forget to ask questions to yourself, because this kind of self-reflection, I think, is what can lead you to making the most out of culture shock, either going to a new place or immersing yourself in a new culture, and also, and I think very importantly, when coming back and when you have ceased to be oblivious to your own culture and start seeing some things of your culture with under a different light. So let's keep this. Don't be afraid to ask.
So thank you very much, everybody. In fact, in this closing round, because so we designed this discussion, we wanted to discuss the culture shock and so on, but I have to admit that, to confess that every time when I was saying or thinking of this, but especially when pronouncing this culture shock, there was something happening in me when I was like, okay. And even now, after these 2 hours of so much interesting and new information for myself, I would like, how to say, to close with a wish. And it will be to find a new term for this feeling, because even if it's one small part of the whole intercultural learning and adjustment to an intercultural environment, or the academics here can correct me, still we've been using this word. And so there were, like, I think in 2002, for those who like football, when this the new rules for the ending of the competitive games was introduced, they started calling it sudden death. And it was the new rule, but it was very ugly. So for the next championship, world championship, they changed it. It was exactly the same rule, but they changed it from sudden death to golden goal. So it is my wish for the next time to continue speaking about the same thing, but with a somehow softer things that will come up out of our mouths, because eventually everything matters, and this culture shock continues bringing some trouble in myself. So yeah, with this metaphor in the football world, I would once again like to thank you very much. And yeah, it was very, very interesting. And yes, looking forward to our next meeting. Thank you very much.